Imagine being replaced, not just in your job, but in every aspect of your life. Your family, the role you play in your local community, even replaced in your own love life. Where does your mind wander? No, we're not talking about AI-enabled automation, though that may end up being a part of the equation. It begins innocently enough. One day, sitting at a bar, you call home. "Who is this?" says the all too familiar voice on the other end of the line. It soon dawns on you that the voice sounds familiar, eerily so, but there's a disconnect, because the voice isn't just any voice, it's your voice. You've been expendable in your own life all along, and you didn't even realize it. This new self takes over everything that once you, living your life, but doing it better than you ever did. This is the everyday horror of Shatterday, a 1975 story by the harlequin of the human condition himself, Harlan Ellison. The story asks not only what we stand to lose when we fail to live up to our potential, but also, more crucially, what do we stand to lose when we achieve our potential? Nothing at all, of course, except everything that makes us who we are. Shatterday begins with a phone call. We meet our main character, Peter J. Novins, an everyman, played by pre-Die Hard Bruce Willis in the 1985 season of the first Twilight Zone reboot. During that fateful call, he comes to understand this other Peter, soon to be called Jay, his middle name, isn't like him at all despite appearances. It's a version of him, sure, but a superior one. Peter has neglected many parts of his life, compromising his ethics at work, treating various girlfriends poorly over the years and failing to build a lasting romantic relationship. The relationship with his elderly mother is also estranged. He knows his work in public relations is unethical. He's batting for the bad guys, but he does it anyway. In his own words, absolving himself of wrongdoing, "If I don't do it, someone else will." We all need to make a buck. Peter is full of rationalizations like this, a lifetime of them, in fact. Jay, Peter's double, is something more. A version of himself ready to step in and live Peter's neglected life with purpose and compassion. As this double starts taking over, Peter faces a nightmarish struggle against a version of himself who's not just better, but determined to erase him, the inferior self unworthy of living. It's an everyday form of psychological horror. It speaks to that universal insecurity that we, too, just like Peter, are constantly failing to live up to our purpose, our dreams, our ambitions. Freud's uncanny and the figure of the double. The figure of the double is imbued with centuries of symbolism. Freud's short 1919 paper, The Uncanny, speaks explicitly to the double and its distinctive uncanny. So just what is the uncanny? The uncanny is first and foremost a feeling. One we get when something familiar suddenly reveals itself to be something other than what we thought it was. Something unfamiliar, unsettling emerges out of what we thought we understood. As Freud defines it himself, the uncanny is that class of the frightening which leads back to what is known of old and long familiar. Uncanny as a word in English fails to capture Freud's true meaning. In German, the word is unheimlich, which translates roughly to unhomely, but it contains that word heimlich for a reason. This is fear, but not fear of the unknown. Rather, it's the fear that our reality could shift at a moment's notice. When what we thought we knew turns out to have been a lie all along. It's the fear of our reality shattering. The fear of our very self, propped up on lies and rationalizations, being undermined. Shatterday. This is the Freudian revolution, that movement from pre-modernist unified self to the irrevocably divided Freudian subject. Finally, it's also a concept that Freud, the frustrated novelist, discusses primarily in terms of literature and stories. Ellison's stories are powerful because it makes literal the figure of the double. As for the double, in Freud's words, the double was originally an insurance against the destruction of the ego, an energetic denial of the power of death, but it later becomes the uncanny harbinger of death itself. From Peter's perspective, Jay is exactly this, a better version of himself that emerges from the self he thought he knew, the self he'd always known. Ellison structures his story in 7 sections, a week in a man's life, leading up to Shatterday. Sunday, Monday, Jews' Day, Wounds Day, Thorns Day, Free Day, Shatterday. But these aren't just any days of the week. Names have power, and here we see the very structure of the narrative Peter J. Novins finds himself caught in is uncanny. Something so familiar as the words we use for the days of the week are called into question. Someday takes up the longest word count as we're thrown into Peter's life at the moment of rupture, beginning with the phone call. But as the days pass, the sections get progressively shorter. Peter J. Novins is whittled down in his unwinnable confrontation with the self, a contest to see who is entitled to live. One of the most uncanny details of Ellison's story is that Peter's experience is symptomatic of a larger, society-wide malaise. As it rang, he stared out at the 45th floor window of the hotel room. It was a wonder anyone managed to stay sane, stay whole in such surroundings, living in cubicles, boxed and trapped and throttled. Was it any surprise that people began to fall apart? The wonder was that it all managed to hold together as well as it did. But the fractures were beginning to appear culturally and now, as with Peter Novins, he mused, personally. Have you ever had the feeling that something is vaguely wrong about the way we've set up society, our institutions, the way we live and work and love and die? So many of us are caught in never-ending cycles of trying to be better people, healthier, kinder, wealthier, even more sane. If only we could fix ourselves, then maybe we could fix the world too. Self-improvement is a funny thing. On one hand, it's a fantasy that capitalism feeds us to sell everything from gym memberships to beauty products to MacBooks. To be human is to be a desiring thing, but what we often call desire is manufactured. Not inorganic necessarily, but manipulated and coerced into new forms that serve the system. In a sense, our desires for self-improvement are attainable, but the question Shatterday poses is, at what cost? When we imagine a better, more successful and attractive version of ourselves, a state of being to which we aspire, what do we imagine except for the double? A vision of ourselves that will inevitably replace us if we achieve it. Fortunately, can I say that, despite self-help gurus littering the culture, we have inbuilt resistance to changing our lives from the ground up. Call it self-preservation, if you will. An equation that goes something like this: getting your act together equals replacement equals ego death. Transcending the self is erasure. Without tensions, without our failings, we might as well be dead. Being towards death, self-improvement and the dark side of living your best life. A man who committed the crime of living up to his potential. It's not lost on me that I've chosen to discuss Freud in this video rather than Jung, despite Jung being explicitly referenced by Peter near the end of the story. Peter asks Jay directly, "I remember the archetypes from Jung. Are you my shadow, my persona, my anima, or my animus?" To which Jay replies, "I suppose I was your shadow. Now I'm the self." And Peter says, "And I'm becoming the shadow." To which Jay says, "No, you're becoming a memory, a bad memory." Ouch, right?
I remember the archetypes from Jung. Being my shadow. Or my persona. Ego. Or anima. When I first got loose, I guess I was the shadow. Now I'm the self. Now I'm becoming the shadow. No. You're becoming a memory.
Jay goes on to explain he was sick for a long time, which was the source of whatever triggered Jay's emergence. If it hadn't happened, I would have been you till I died. It would have been a lousy life and a miserable death. Going back a bit, here we get a glimpse again that whatever's happening, the splitting off of the double, is a direct result of this sickness. And the sickness itself, a product of the broader cultural malaise. If we pull this thread further, we begin to realize Peter is, seen through this lens, fundamentally innocent. A man who committed the crime of never living up to his potential, until his double did it for him. The penalty? Death. Why are so many of us so stuck? Is it because we are attached to our jouissance, our own peculiar form of suffering that contains our identity? Our wound makes us who we are, but doesn't define us. It doesn't have to trap us. To maximize our potential is to become better than we are, In other words, to disappear, to die. Novans's death is a death of the old self, ceasing to matter in his own life. Life is not fiction, but fiction, stories like Shatterday, can teach us something about life. Our identity is often closely bound to our own perceived mediocrity, which we defend relentlessly. Our wound, our Lacanian lack, is also generative. It creates desire, something more real than the manufactured desire of the systems we're trapped in. Maybe it's time you read Shatterday and ask yourself an important question. Does this ordinary man, Michael J. Novans, die, or does he transcend?